Anyways, for a completely different topic, let's continue what Keely kicked off with, talking about open source metrics. And so I've got a little bit of a different perspective than Keely does, and especially the size and scale of the projects that I work on are much smaller. So hopefully that's helpful for you in providing some information on different types of projects. So like she was mentioning, maintainers are often concerned about improving and maintaining open source project health, and not so concerned with metrics, maybe viewing them as like a necessary evil sometimes. And I think a lot of that is kind of credited to the fact that metrics can be used to sort of persuade somebody, or to lie with statistics, if you will, about something that you want them to believe, or you want them to believe to be true. So if we're going to take a horrible example of that, well, I could talk about if maintainers are underpaid or not. Then I could look at groups of folks that are well paid and they're maintainers and say, oh, look, it's not true. Or I could, base my metrics off of other data that says that, oh, yes, maintainers are the most underpaid group out of any. So, so it's easy to lie with data and math when we're selective and things like that. And so as we're approaching this, I just want to help you sort of think about shedding off some of the things that you know about metrics and some of the ways that maybe they've been used against you, so that we can think about how they may be helpful going forward. So let's go ahead and dive in. So if you couldn't already see my face here, here's another picture of my face. So who am I to talk about open source metrics? Well, I'm not an expert. I'm just a maintainer with questions about the projects that I work on. So that's the perspective that I'm coming at it with. Work-wise, I'm a senior software engineer at GitHub, like Brian mentioned. Also an open source maintainer for several GitHub hosted projects. My main contact info is up on the screen. If you'd like to have a conversation about anything, I'd be happy to engage. If you're going to be around after my talk, then GatherTown would be great as well. So yeah, I often like to refer to this picture of me as, this is like my happy, peaceful state, and what I look like when I'm thinking about open source metrics, but that would just be a joke. This is actually what I look like when I'm thinking about open source metrics. I'm feeling a little sick, I'm confused, I'm distorted, my eyes are popping out of my head. Yeah, so I also have a ton of baggage that goes with metrics. But if we are to consider what's helpful about metrics, what's going to come out of them, then it can be kind of a complex topic, and it's a lot, it's overwhelming. And at least for me it is. And so with tough topics like this, the engineer in me comes out and says, well, okay, we need to break this problem down into its core pieces, and try and tackle the issues in a more manageable size. So I've done that with metrics for myself as an approach to try and figure out what to do for my projects. And so I've broken it down into, why metrics, which ones, how easy is it to start, and how much will it all cost if I don't want to do all the work myself? And a little later, I'm going to demonstrate a simple solution that I use for tracking project health over time using Cauldron.io. And I promise it is a solution that won't make you want to pull your hair out like I wanted to when I tried to build something that would do all of this for me. So let's start with why metrics. So, well, we have questions, or at least I do, like I said, about how this whole open source thing is going. I don't know about you folks, but I've been doing open source maintainership for a year or two. And I constantly have questions for myself, like, am I doing this right? Is anybody angry with my projects? Maybe I worry about that too much. Or some other days I'm worried about, are people even using some of these projects that I'm putting out there? And again, a lot of people do have different motivations for why they put out their project. But if you think about your own goals or motivations for putting out a project, those should be the things that are driving why you're doing metrics, right? So don't do metrics just to try and figure out like, what's going on or browse things. I guess you could, but I get severely overwhelmed when I do that. So what kind of questions can we answer? Like I mentioned here in the slide, community health, project usage, code stability, contributed to diversity, and tons of other things. So there's a lot of questions that you can answer with metrics. I'm going to try and remind everyone to think about it in that lens too, of like questions and answers. And so what about which metrics do we start with, right? So if we just think about all of the things that we can measure and try and derive like which metrics we should pay attention to, or which are the important ones from there, it's sort of a boil the ocean type of approach, because there's so many metrics that you can look at. So I like to start with, again, what are your project goals? What are your aspirations, motivations for doing this in the first place as a project? And so that can be you, or you and whoever is maintaining this project as well. So it's important to have a conversation about it. And so we can take those goals and form those into questions. So instead of talking hypothetical, I'll give you an example. If we want to ensure that there's diversity amongst our contributor and community and the maintainer community, well, then we can take that goal, form it into maybe a couple of questions. One would be, how diverse is our contributor community? And then two is, how diverse is our maintainer community? And so again, those questions both start with, how diverse is, such and such community? Notice here, I didn't form the question as, is our community diverse? Is our contributor or maintainer community diverse? Because that would lead to a yes or no answer. So it's sort of a leading question. And typically I avoid yes or no questions as metrics, because they can lack context and color, and you don't get to see their checkered past. And they tend to end conversations, right? So imagine me asking for the Python community. Oh, is the Python community, is their contributor community diverse? And then somebody might say yes, somebody else might say no. It's all sort of based on opinion, and then we lost all of this data-driven purpose of looking at metrics anyways. So it's just not scientific. And as an engineer, I strive for that. So, that it also doesn't show the historical nature either. Have you always been diverse? Like, it just raises more questions. And so, what we want to do is to be able to form them in that how much type of sentence frame, like how diverse is the community, so that then you can see the information based on the data that's presented about the past, about the context, about where we're headed, what the trend is it getting worse or better? And then once you have all that information, it actually becomes less important, like what the yes or no question is, because you can strive to be better than where you're at if it's what's important to you. And it's something that never has to be achieved. You think about like if NASA had decided like, well, once we get to the moon, we're just going to like shut stuff down and never go into space again, because we've done it. We met our metric. Well, that's not very exciting. There are a lot of space lovers out there, myself included, that would be let down. So anywho, we've got to provide more than that. We've got to stretch further than that. And so our metrics have to match us in that. So what about when you've selected which metric you want to look at? You've formed a question, you've got a goal attached to that, and then you say, okay, I'm going to measure this thing. Maybe it's diversity. And then, well, now you've got to find all the data. You've got to automate the data collection. You've got to measure that over time. You've got to put it in a way that is readable, and then share that with other folks and make sure that they have permission to, all of these things. There's so much to do. And so, I mentioned earlier in the talk that I would make this easy and in a way that doesn't make you want to pull your hair out. And so, let's go ahead and optimize this algorithm for the overworked, underpaid maintainers that are short on time, but have a lot of passion about this. So how about 3 steps instead of like all this stuff? Let's just consider your goals. Let's form a question, and then let's magically get the answer somehow. So let me show you how I actually do the magic part for my projects, and we'll get into that. So I use the Chaos community website for the first 2 steps in terms of trying to think about what goals I have for the community or for the project, as well as other maintainers that I work with. And then for actually selecting a metric behind that. So the website, as you'll see there on the slide, is chaos.community. And then they have a /metrics page that you can check out. But there's tons of good information all over this. But if you're looking for to be able to identify like goals and what metrics might attach to that goal and what questions might attach to those metrics and kind of have that whole kit, this website and community of folks is really helpful in sort of laying this out. So whether it's community growth or diversity or pull request commits or anything like that, they've got tons of different metrics and areas for that. So check out chaos.community for those steps. It's been extremely helpful for me. And then let's take a look at if you actually double click. I'm going to go to that previous slide again. Sorry for bringing it back and forth here. But the highlighted metrics or /details there, if you click on any one of those, then it'll actually take you to a page that actually gives you specific information on what that metric really means. So new contributors, what does that mean? How is that defined? Remember, before we talked about how diversity can be defined in a lot of different ways. It's good enough for some, not for others. And so here's, it really lays out what the definition is, and then, what some key objectives are related to that, and then how to implement it as well. So super helpful, again, on that website. So then once I know what I'm looking for, I've got my sort of trifecta of goal, metric, and questions around that that I'm looking to sort of bring to light. Then I go over to Cauldron.io, another website on the internet. It's a great thing if you haven't heard of it. And I have it scan my repositories for a given project. So here we're looking at the Superlinter project summary over the past year, which is one of the projects that I'm a maintainer for. And you can see that there's a bunch of different tabs up there. I guess we'll start with those. And so, this is the summary page. There's activity, there's community-based stuff, performance. And this is the overwhelming part where you could dig into all these things and try and get information from all of this data. And it's pretty overwhelming. But if you, again, focus on what you were looking for, you can help that to navigate through these pages. So if I was looking for, activity over the past year, then I can look at that. That's what we're looking at here. And, I can gain knowledge about like, oh, wow. Okay. So from, July last year to September last year, things were really hopping, like, 60 to 140 commits, per day. And this is pretty nuts. And so then it kind of went into this new steady state after October hit. And that was likely due to the fact that we had just launched the project and there was a lot of initial activity to fix all of our spelling mistakes and things like that. And so, you can use Cauldron.io to help kind of auto-magically put all this information at your fingertips and browse through the relevant information to answer the question that you originally had. So you can also compare projects. So you can kind of see the URL scheme here. You can compare and then and look at the differences between 2 different projects that are similar. Huge warning on comparing projects. This is a neat feature and is applicable to a couple of projects that, like, I have 2 projects that are both GitHub Actions that are out there. And those are nice to compare because they launched about the same time. They're kind of doing similar things. But this could be a vehicle for some pretty treacherous psychological, attacks on yourself in terms of like, trying to be like famous Project X or Y. And so not everybody's going to have that. So insert a inspirational speech here about being true to yourself and being the best version of yourself, and having that be your goal versus trying to be like some other community or some other project. It's just not going to happen. And if you did achieve that you were exactly like some other project, well, then you're going to lose your project, because the two projects probably should merge at that point if they're doing the same thing with the same people in the same way. So anyways, huge warning on comparing projects, but the feature is available. Proceed cautiously. So just to dive into an example, what I'm talking about here is, there's the theoretical stuff is all applicable, but just to talk about the Superlinter project that I'm on, one of our goals is be a responsive project that addresses issues in a reasonable time. So a couple of questions that we narrowed down to was, okay, how long on average does it take to close an issue or a PR, pull request? And how long on average does it take to review that pull request? So then we've got our goal, we've got our question, and our metric is measuring closed PRs and or the time it takes to close a PR and whether an issue is closed or not. So then we can actually look at that data over time. This is pulled straight out of Cauldron.io. Nothing fancy that I had to do at all. I can show this to other folks, other maintainers. We can work on it. We can talk about what happened when those times got really long, maybe in between, January and March of 2020 there. What was going on, a pandemic, lots of other things. But so it's a really helpful tool to start to have those conversations. You can see trends, and work towards goals too. If you want to set a goal of like, well, we'd really love to be responding to folks within an average of 14 days, and we're currently at like 30 or 60, we've got some work to do. How do we close that gap, right? So if we look at this from a summary, again, hopefully you've heard it enough to be able to remember it, but consider your goals, form those questions. You've got the Chaos community to help you. And then get your answers by going to Cauldron.io, let them do all the hard work for you. So yeah, I wish you a safe journey into the land of metrics. I know I've gotten myself into trouble in this area several times, both at work and outside of work. But that's stories for another time. You can actually come join me in GatherTown, and I'd love to hear about your metrics horror stories and success stories as well, as we can chat about what works in our projects. So thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Zach.
Yes, thanks, Zach. Appreciate all the examples and the links as well. I can't wait to play around with them.
Yeah.
And the caution to not beat ourselves up too much using the metrics that we actually go find.
Yeah. It's been interesting to listen to the other talks and hear about like, the maintainer responsibility and like saying no nicely and different things. Like, there's a lot of weight just emotionally on maintainers, and sometimes that can be, I know for myself, who's not necessarily very emotionally fluent, that it can be difficult to try and get some of that stuff out. So try and put up caution signs for folks to, hey, don't go this way. It was dark. So.
Folks, please go join Zach in GatherTown, chat metrics, chat the dark path, and we are going to talk a bit and wrap up.